Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cuppa.tv. It is Cookie here for your Wednesday lunchtime Pick My Brain session where we're going to be inviting in Fleur Heazlewood. Oh, my God, a good start. Very, very shortly, everyone. So make sure you stick around because we're going to be inviting in Fleur very, very soon. In fact, I'm on fire today. I just kicked the plug down here and it disabled my whole internet. So brace yourselves, everyone. This is going to be a cracking show. Before I kick it off, I just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, water and community. I pay my respects to them and to their cultures and to the elders, both past, present and emerging. I always want to say thanks to the First Nations leaders, elders, storytellers who have shared their wisdom with us here within the Cuppa walls. It is a learning journey that I am incredibly grateful for. And we're going to be bringing more and more conversations to the community around First Nations leadership and Indigenous culture in general. So today's guests, we are talking about the very, very big topic area of psychological hazards and safety. And Fleur is one of the best in the biz. In fact, we've managed to get her across a couple of our clients already, and great feedback from those clients embracing her knowledge set. So she's a leadership expert, speaker, founder of the Blueberry Institute, which helps leaders build healthy, resilient and high-performing teams. She's got over 20 years of corporate leadership experience, including as CEO, and she's trained thousands of people in psychological safety, resilience, and mental health-based conversations. She's a multi-award-winning author, Resilient Recipes and Leading Wellbeing, both recognised for excellence in leadership, wellbeing, and workplace mental health. Let's bring her in right now. Fleur, welcome to Cuppa. How you doing?
Hey, it's fabulous to be here.
And I stuffed up your name. Heazlewood.
Heazlewood.
It's not that hard, really, is it?
Yeah, well, it's a funny spelling. If by some miracle people get Fleur pronounced correctly, you're always going to trip up over the spelling of Heazlewood. So it's absolutely fine, and I'm used to it all.
Someone that's delivered over 800 conversations. You think I could get names right. But anyway, hopefully you're feeling safe in this environment, Fleur, and we can be very open with and vulnerable around things that we may not get right inside our organisations or maybe within these Cuppa walls as well. So there's been so much talk, Fleur, about psychosocial hazards inside workplaces, but what do they actually mean in everyday life or terms?
One of the biggest challenges I think that we have when it comes to psychosocial hazards and psychological safety, and given that we do have some psychological safety between the two of us, I actually loved how you tripped up over the intro and actually blended psychosocial and safety together, because the reality is what's going on in this space is there's a lot of jargon. It's very technical. It's very compliance based. We all know that we need to be doing something with it, but there's a what the kind of, there's a fire hose of regulatory information, and there's not a huge amount of stuff that unpacks it into what does this look like in everyday life. And as a leader or a manager or even, just an employee at work that's kind of like wondering what their stress might feel like around what it actually is and how to sort of like maybe start applying it to your own workplace. So on a really simplistic level, or our starting level, I should say, a psychosocial hazard is anything at work that can cause psychological harm. So even in of itself, that's not particularly helpful yet. So when we start to break down psychological harm, this is where it starts to become a little bit more meaningful. Psychological harm occurs when those external pressures or internal stressors start to overwhelm a person's ability to cope. That may lead to chronic stress. So this is not the everyday healthy up and down stress. Chronic stress, which is a buildup of stress, potentially burnout, or other mental health issues that negatively affect both well-being and performance. And so within that definition, we can kind of like start to see that there are some elements that we can work with. But one of the challenges is we're still learning in our organisations what is stress? What are the signs of stress? What does healthy stress look like versus unhealthy stress? Then when we talk about chronic stress, what's the difference between those? How do I know what's really burnout versus exhaustion and maybe someone being stressed? And how on earth then do I sort of like start to like unpick all of these things and go, what might someone developing a mental health issue look like? And so one of the things that I like to share with people, particularly when we're talking about starting to demystify it, is the importance of actually starting to educate ourselves around what some of those differences are. So for example, stress, for the most part, is actually our body's healthy response. So we're designed to experience stress when we're feeling maybe a little bit vulnerable, we're in a challenging situation, we've got a high stakes project that we want to do a really good job on. We're having a conversation like this on cuppa in front of 100 people and we don't know whether we're going to say the right things or not. So naturally I have like a little bit of stress, going on. And for the most part, that's a healthy response and a good thing. So it's giving me a tick of adrenaline, it's giving me an uptick of cortisol, which hopefully means that even when I do make a mistake, I'll be able to keep going. When we start to see stress moving into some of these things like unhealthy stress or distress, this is coming about as what we describe more of a negative state that arises when stress becomes overwhelming and unmanageable to the person. So what we're seeing here is we're flipped from that sort of like almost that hyper excitement, helping you to get things done, into a negative state that's sending us maybe into a fight, flight, freeze, overwhelm, unmanageable, and it's actually giving us a signal that our coping mechanisms either aren't there or feeling a little bit depleted. And so it's really important that we educate ourselves around healthy versus unhealthy stress and learn the signs that are indicating whether this is stress versus stretch versus strain. And each of these things is trainable. So we can all sort of like learn to understand what the differences are, how to recognize when we're feeling that or our teams are feeling like that, and be able to course correct in the moment so it's not getting to this place of causing psychological harm.
It sounds very complex in the way that each individual has their probably own tolerance around certain components of what stress actually is. How do we start identifying the individual and being able to work with the individual based on their ability to either tolerate stress in different ways? Because it feels like it has to be a very individual based process, correct?
Absolutely. So each of us is going to experience stress in different ways, have different triggers. And it comes, I guess, from a whole like plethora of sort of like background, both personal and professional, reasons as to why you might have two people facing a situation and someone is fine with it and someone's experiencing quite chronic stress about it. And so things like our level of psychological safety with our manager and with our team. So this is where we start to link psychological safety and psychosocial hazards together. And so what we're talking about with psychological safety is our ability to feel, comfortable, accepted and valued, regardless of how we show up, our views, whether we're different to someone. It means that we can raise questions. We can put our hand up when we're feeling as if, we are a little bit of control and need help without fearing for adverse sort of like reactions or consequences in the workplace. So we're not worried that our colleagues will pick on us or our manager will think differently of us or we'll be like, funneled down some performance management path because we're sort of like on a different track or we've got different ideas to our colleagues and our team and our manager. And so what we find is that when we have a team that has deliberately built that foundation of trust and communication and is able to hold the differences, then we will also be able to pick up those individual nuances around which stressors or pressure, which team members react to or don't react to, where are the various strengths within the teams around particular situations or tasks, where are the gaps, and how do we hold the space for each other. So there's that importance of that open, an open environment where people can talk through the good, the bad, the ugly of everything that they're going through, and be able to say, you know what, I actually am starting to feel really stressed about this. I know this is my thing, but I need some help. The other thing we need to be making sure that we do, particularly as leaders and managers, is in our one-on-one meetings with each of our individuals, we are having regular check-in conversations. How are you feeling this week? What's your energy like? What are you most excited about? What do you might be a bit trepidatious about? What's working well for you that you're really confident, yep, this is going to be great? What are you struggling with? And let's actually talk about what that is. And so when we're talking about managing things like psychosocial hazards, looking out for those signs that maybe our wellbeing's taken a hit, or our mental health's being a little bit wobbly, or maybe the stress is starting to become a little bit uncontrollable. If we're having these regular conversations, and it doesn't need to get out of hand and then hit this psychosocial hazards area.
There's the legislation's obviously been passed, and organisations now need to really look at this. Just your top line view initially, I'm just keen to understand, Fleur, as organizations look into this, and what do you feel like they're saying to you? Like, is there trepidation around moving forward with this? Is there just the uncertainty of what this means? Like, what is the top line view that you're seeing from the organizations that you're talking to?
I described the three, there's almost three levels. So when I recently spoke with the Australian Institute of Company Directors to a range of directors, there's a real desire to actually understand, what does the legislation mean? How does it translate into real life? What is it that they need to do to enable our HR business partners and leaders to fully understand what their responsibilities are? But then I also saw a genuine need and desire to ensure that the investment is being put in place to fill any of those skills gaps. When I speak to leaders, I'm finding a lot of trepidation, particularly around their safety or their feeling of being able to have constructive performance management conversations now. So we're seeing a lot of, I'm having a performance management conversation with this person, they're coming back and they're saying that this is detrimental to their mental health. I can't do, and now I can't do anything. So how do I actually make sure that we are getting the work done while also appropriately following the processes and the due diligence and care that we need to, while also looking after the rest of the team. So there's this real, almost like taking a back step back, I'm noticing from our leaders and managers, because they're really concerned that they're not getting it right. And because this psychosocial language now is out there, but people actually don't really understand what it is, we can be seeing a little bit with some conversations with staff, this whole psychosocial hazards place being weaponized a little bit and playing off some of the mental health supports that are there. But the reality is that, as leaders and managers, we need to feel confident that we can have a performance management or a performance improvement discussion. If we have our processes and skills in place, what an employee might be coming back to us and saying, hey, this is causing me stress, or this is causing me, mental health issues. What we need to have some literacy around is understanding the difference between distress and discomfort. So we absolutely have those crunchy conversations, but we just need to learn the skills to hold the space for someone to come back and articulate that they actually feel distressed about the process. And of course they're going to, because there is this element of like feeling like I'm personally unsafe. Now my performance is being put into question. So we would naturally expect some stress. But that doesn't mean that if we're appropriately following the process, we're giving them the supports, the feedback and working through that we can't hold the space for their discomfort and distress around the process, and support them in terms of managing their emotions and feelings while also supporting them to improve their performance. So, the biggest thing I'm seeing from leaders, which is really interesting, because I saw this when we first started really seeing that uptick around the beginning of COVID, when managers and leaders were feeling really concerned about needing to have mental health check-ins and mental health conversations. We have the same kind of fear. It's sort of like, well, I don't really know what to say, how to say it appropriately. Am I going to inadvertently offend someone? Will I say the wrong thing and make them feel worse? So from that leader's perspective, what I'm seeing is that same kind of uncertainty when it comes to psychosocial hazards, and how do we actually manage that stress, distress, stretch, strain, layer of management expectations. And then, of course, from the third level, the HR, from an HR perspective, what we're also seeing, similar to when we first started talking about mental health, is now, because we have our managers and leaders a little bit fearful around having some of either these stretch conversations, like I'm giving somebody, an opportunity to grow here, but they're coming back and saying it's too stressful for them. Or we're seeing them send the performance management conversation to HR because they're going, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing and end up in the psychosocial hazard space. And so very much with that HR lens, we're very much having conversations now around what are the things that we need to be doing to put in place the language and the literacy. So people, both our leaders and managers, and also all our staff, actually understand what is stress versus distress versus stretch, I should say. So there's too many S's already, right? Versus discomfort or distress. So there's that piece there. And then to give our leaders and managers the toolkit to empower them, to be able to feel more capable and confident when it comes to having these everyday conversations again.
I definitely have heard that from the HR teams around them being now the bottleneck of everything, and that hasn't allowed them to do other parts of their job because of everything that they've needed to implement around this. I'm going to ask for your expertise here, Fleur, hence why I'm picking your brain a little bit. And everyone, if you want to pick the brain of Fleur, please click on the links in the copy area where you can check out Fleur's profile and be able to engage with her and pick her brain on any of these types of nuances to this topic area, because it is complex. What would be the ideal roadmap of a organization who wants to do better in this? Like how is that step one? This is what you need to do. Is there an ideal roadmap in your brain that if someone followed that process, they would feel like they have this semi under control?
I like that. The answer is yes, and.
Okay.
So the first thing that I want to put out there in terms of helping people, whether it's our HR teams, our HR partners, or our leaders, is this journey around really normalizing and embedding psychosocial hazards. To be perfectly honest, I would prefer to describe it as like psychosocial safety, because I think it's a lot more proactive and a helpful way of describing it. The journey map is not that dissimilar to the journey map that we all were undertaking when it came to improving our mental health literacy, awareness, skills, training, and normalizing those conversations at work. So from a very, very starting point, our step one would be, what is it that our organisation already has in terms of policies and processes around this? Do we actually understand what they look like? Are people going to pick up one of these and go, yes, I know this is what I need to be doing? If not, we might need to be doing a little bit of work around demystifying it and putting in place just some like checklists and frameworks. This is around how we do it. Most organisations I know have got a psychosocial hazards assessment kind of checklist, so not dissimilar to that step-by-step type of scenario when it actually comes to sort of like breaking down and socialising those policies and processes, or building those policies and processes. The next step around that is actually developing our language and our literacy around those key terms. And when I talk about this is across the organisation. So we need to start with our executive team and sort of like start building out what are our organisational roles and responsibilities. What are the key terms? What does this mean? And how do we actually start to unpick the differences between, safe versus healthy versus unsafe versus unhealthy? And we need to give all staff that language and literacy so that our employees can have a proactive conversation with their managers, especially if there is a good and a close relationship here. So being able to say, you know what, I'm feeling really uncomfortable with this new, this new project. I haven't done this before, and I'm really, really worried that I'm going to fail in front of people. I need some help. Or in that performance management conversation discussion, I'm feeling actually really quite vulnerable at the moment, and I think I am in this like stress place, and can we please talk about that? But the most important training is for our leaders and managers around how to have those challenging conversations. And when I'm talking about challenging conversations here, I'm talking about the mental health, the wellbeing, the talking through things like stress and workload in a way that's going to be helpful and help both parties feel seen and heard, but without leaders and managers feeling under attack because of potentially workload demands and some of those things that they're managing. The reality is that our top psychosocial hazards are all actually directly influenced and controllable by our managers and leaders. So We're talking about things like reasonable versus unreasonable workload. We're talking about things like role clarity, job clarity, or clarity even around this is what a good job looks like for this particular task. We're talking about things like conflict across team members that is like festering and not being developed. So when we're talking about supporting our leaders and managers training, we're actually talking about the skills. How do we create an environment where this team can constructively debate differences of opinion and brainstorm a multitude of ideas and be okay being with the discomfort? So being comfortable with the process while being able to hold the tension of differences. How do we recognize when conflict is starting to become out of hand and have a healthy way of bringing both of those parties together and resolving conflict within our teams? How do we actually lean into those conversations when someone might be feeling a little bit wobbly, or we're starting to see some of those poor behaviours and reactions that often occur when someone's feeling stressed, in a way where that person feels supported but also understands, or is then led to understand, that they're having a negative impact on other people within the team as well. So we're really talking through that psychosocial hazards assessment, policies and processes, socialising of what we mean by that, building our language and literacy and expanding that mental health language, and then most importantly, giving our leaders the tools and skills to have better conversations, hence why this is a brilliant topic to be talking about on Cuppa.
Yes.
Because one of the biggest resistances I get, particularly from leaders and managers, is like, I've already got way too much on my plate as it is now, right? Now you're wanting me to do this as well. And the other thing that we know from most of the stats that are coming out when it comes to burnout and intentions to leave work, it's our managers and leaders group that is actually experiencing, most of this like burnout and stress that's tracking towards distress. And a core part of this leader and manager training is understanding this is adding to your toolkit and not to your workload. How do we have better one-on-ones that pick this stuff up? How do we set our team up for better psychological safety, which means the team is then a lot more mature and able to handle those differences without coming running to us? And then how can we create psychological safety for ourselves with our key HR or people partner and our leader to be able to have the conversations that we need around managing our own workload or our own team's workload and priorities better?
Is there a major difference for those clients that have workforces, whether it's locally in the office or mainly working remote? Is there any nuances to these conversations that need to change, or is it just about, how to be better humans in general to be more aligned with your employee where they're at that time?
Well, yes, we absolutely need to be giving ourselves the permission and showing up as humans and having vulnerable conversations and just having more conversations in general. One of the biggest things that I speak with my leaders in the training workshops and coaching that I do is I encourage everyone, when we're sort of like having our one-on-one conversations, to start with how are you before we go into how are you going. And they seem quite the same thing, but there's a nuance there. If we start with how are you, What are your energy levels like? How are you feeling? How are you feeling in terms of your confidence, energy, capability around what you have on your plate this week? And then moving into the sort of like, how do we do it? What does it look like in terms of prioritization? Those kinds of conversations are really important, regardless of whether we're in person or online, but they're particularly more important online because we don't have the same kind of everyday opportunities to be able to sort of like eyeball that person and bump into them in the kitchen and have a cup of tea and actually see how they are. So we need to be more deliberate in creating those circumstances where we're asking how they are. So the biggest difference I see for virtual versus in person is the need to be more structured and to really sort of like embed this into our routines and our structures, as opposed to relying on that more informal bump in and sort of like getting a sense of how someone is a bit more by osmosis. We need to be much more deliberate.
Do you think every leader can be taught this, or do you think there is a certain type of leader now that's going to emerge in how workplaces are forming in the modern working world?
Every single manager and leader can learn to make the distinction or start to recognize the signs that someone's not traveling so well early. They can all learn the conversation skills, how to approach someone safely, how to start the conversation appropriately. So that's one of the other questions I get. How do I know if I'm getting like too personal and I need to stay on the side of professional? And, am I going to offend someone because I'm asking them how they are, right? So we can all learn a conversation structure around that. We can also learn various ways of responding. And while some of us will more naturally have a bit more of a bent towards that more sort of like human-centered style of leadership, everything that I'm talking through today are things that are trainable and learnable that we can practice and become proficient in. So that's an absolute given. And the other thing that we talk about a lot, which makes a really big difference, is this important, and I'm calling it a skill of empathy. Once upon a time, empathy was thought of as more of a trait than a skill. So you either have empathy or you don't. Now, it is fair to say that some people are born with more empathy and more of a bent towards empathy, and others don't. But the reality is we can also break down things like empathy into a set of skills. So if this isn't your natural place of playing, you can actually learn what the steps are. We can give you sort of like some scripts and some starting points so that you've got an opportunity to sort of like try it out, demonstrate it in the conversations that matter, and then develop your own way of being able to, show up with, empathy to your vulnerable teammates.
I'd love that. And, I was hoping you'd get there as well, because I think, for me, that layer is so critical now, and being able to really connect with the human on the other side. So developing that type of skill set is, it goes a long way to making people feel safe in the roles that they're in. And I threw out something on LinkedIn the other day around, I got on my soapbox about, the digital world and how much it's impacting people from, technology. And there's 13 different comms mechanisms inside an organization now. And it's so easy to put slacks and tonality and all that type of stuff becomes harder through those environments. Getting back to the human side of that human connection is critical in this, making sure that people feel safe, correct? Like having real conversations with people instead of just keeping everything to an email or text message or Slack message, etc. Is that your take as well?
Oh, spot on. So I tend to find we're going to have sort of like less miscommunication or less fails when it comes to let's say a text or a Slack or an email, when we've actually developed a foundation from genuine conversations, both individually and as a team. When we're missing a tonality or we're reading a tone that hasn't been the intention of the person that is sending it to us, if we already have this place of trust, and we know that this person in general is well intentioned, we're less likely to get offended and get sent off into some kind of like text war or whatever the case may be. And so one of the things that I speak with all of the leaders and managers I work with, is we will actually go through, what are your meeting structures? What are your primary forms of communication for different parts? What is the most appropriate form of communication? Or if there's a particular topic that's new, have we actually taken the time as a team to talk through this, warts and all? What are the things that we're excited about? What are the things that, we think this team has as a strength with this, that actually where we're feeling a bit fearful, where are the gaps? Where might we be worried that there might be some, weaknesses that will let us down, or other people or other teams might, pick up on, where we will feel under attack? How will we handle this together? So once we've had those conversations and had them properly in person, and when I talk about in person, it can be exactly the way we are now, online, in person, with our cameras on. It then makes it a lot easier to then be able to follow up with those, more offline, written, messagey, kind of formats. But we've got to have that hierarchy of psychological safety. So this is where our trust, our belief that our team is well-intentioned, our belief that the people that we work with have our backs, the belief that we can actually be vulnerable and say, hey, this might sound a little bit silly, but I'm worried about this. And know that our team and the people around us are going to hold that with care and, bundle in with support, as opposed to bundle in with ridicule and humor, for example.
What do you say to a manager or a leader who might say these words? Because I've heard these words as well. This is just opening up a can of worms where people are now saying things that I don't believe is true, and they're using this as a way to get more time off, or something along those types of lines. What would you say?
Absolutely. So anything that isn't well known, understood, and we're shying away from it because we kind of don't know how to deal with it, I would put in this realm of can of worms.
Yeah.
And I would describe this as a really natural reaction. And the reality is that there's only a can of worms if we don't take the time to educate ourselves around what these things actually are. And so when someone comes to us and throws a spray of things that they're hoping will land, so maybe that they can rort the system a little bit. And I know, this is kind of one of those known unspokens, but let's face it, if people are in that position or that mindset where they want to rort the system, if it's not psychosocial hazards, they'll go look for something else. They're looking for the weakness and the chinks in the armor around the process. So if someone's coming to us with a complaint or an issue, this workload is unreasonable, this performance management is causing me mental health issues, and so I'm going to need to take a few days off, or I know I said I wanted to grow in this area, but you know what, this stress project is just way too much, and I actually think you're sending me to burnout. We get a lot of people bandying these kinds of words around and almost, weaponizing them a little bit. Where we have that vacuum of not having a response because we are actually unable to handle and unpick this is where we will actually find that if we don't step into it and figure it out, things will get worse rather than better.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what worse looks like. So we don't know how to respond, and so the person actually goes on mental health leave because they're not coping with being performance managed. The rest of the team sees this, and they kind of go, well, how come this person gets to take mental health, days, and the rest of us are doing the right thing? The rest of the team is picking up that person's work generally, and we're in this place when we don't know when this person's going to come back or not. And if they do come back, what kind of attitude and the way they're going to treat the rest of the team when they do come back. So what we're actually doing is we're creating this unhealthy, festering environment within our team, and we're actually starting to develop resentment in our good performers and the people that are doing the right thing. And so what I'd like to put back out there is if this can of worms is going to open, it's going to open regardless of whether we avoid the conversation or not.
Yeah.
But the quicker we have the conversation, the less likely we're going to get the negative spirals and take that hit to the morale of our overall team, that hit to the motivation of our great performers. and I guess just the hit overall to actually our team's psychological safety. So psychological safety is like knowing that everybody is going to be treated with respect. So as a manager, if we're not dealing with this, we're sort of like undermining the psychological safety of our team. And when we start to see those deteriorating relationships, deteriorating trust, losing motivation and engagement, then our team's performance is naturally going to nosedive as well. There's an absolute snowball effect. So when someone comes to me, I don't want to go there because it's a can of worms, and if I open up the can of worms, things will get worse. I'd like to sort of like demystify that or bust that myth and actually say, once someone has chosen to turn the lid off, to take the lid off and, go in a direction that we don't feel uncomfortable with, the can of worms is already open. And so it's really up to us to, upskill ourselves and actually have the courage to also put our hands up and say, hey, I need some help in terms of dealing with this because it's not okay.
Such a good point. And I think that's why, when we first spoke about this, Fleur, and hence why we've already got you into, one of our good clients and, supporting them in that basic understanding and setting up the right frameworks and structures and that education flow. It's so critical for us to do that because at least then we've got something to base it off. And then if we have that right language and approach where everyone is speaking the same language, that helps ease some of that components, because where everything goes missing is when we just don't have that clarity around things, when we're not talking the same and leaders are talking different language and all that type of stuff. We need to get that clear because that's where consistency comes. And you know what? Employees want that. In a place where we've experienced such change in our organizations over the last 5 years, consistency and clarity in everything that we do is so critical for any business to be able to move forward, and especially with this new legislation as well. Fleur, what are some of the other things that managers may want to have in their toolkit? You explained one before about how to approach conversations. Is there anything else in that toolkit that you reckon a manager should have?
The skills areas I really encourage managers to sort of like be building out is absolutely first and foremost developing our capability and confidence in actually having the difficult conversations around people's wellbeing, stress, and mental health. That's a absolute foundation. When we're less afraid of having these conversations, we'll actually find they're not as scary and necessarily as extreme as we're expecting. The foundational skill set I encourage managers and leaders to look at is our psychological safety skills. So one of the things that we know is when we create a team of psychological safety, not only does it improve our well-being and our mental health outcomes and reduces risk, but it is actually the top predictor of a team's performance. Right. And so one of the things I encourage our leaders and managers to think about is like learning these psychological safety skills, these mental health conversation skills, the ability to have difficult conversations, the ability to manage constructive debate and differences within our teams. While these are all going to support us in making sure we're creating an environment of psychosocial safety, so we're like less at risk of these psychosocial hazards, ultimately they are also going to enable us to increase our performance and our team's performance. And over time, when the team actually understands what these norms are, like our rules of how we want to show up as a team, you'll find that they will be course correcting just as much as you are course correcting, and you are going to find that you'll have less of your time sucked up into like managing differences, difficulties, complaints, and challenges. So I would also like to ultimately put out there, as us being in this managers and leaders group, we've got a massive squeeze on our well-being and those like burnout indicators. By actually getting on the front foot with the skills around psychosocial and psychological safety, we will actually get to a point where we will be a lot freer of all of these like niggly, time-consuming, people-related issues that we have to deal with all the time. Our teams will be happier and our performance will lift.
There's no instant magic wand that will make all this better. It is going to take work and effort. And again, everyone, if you want to check out Fleur's new profile on Cuppa, you can do so here. That's got everything on there around Fleur, all her offerings from keynotes to workshops, coaching inquiries, get her on your podcast, a whole bunch of information around all her credibility and everything that she does in this space. So if you want to click on that link, we'll be sending it out in the replay document, or if you want to do it right now, you can have a look down the bottom of the show copy. We have got a Pick My Brain logo there. Click on that and you'll go straight to Fleur's little world on Cuppa to be able to engage her. Fleur, you've been absolutely incredible today. We are coming up for time. What would be the one step tomorrow that a leader could take to improve that psychosocial safety? What would you recommend they do? The one thing.
The one thing I encourage everyone to do is to stop looking at health and safety and wellbeing as a compliance thing or wellbeing as a reward for performance. The biggest frame that I invite all leaders and managers to think about is actually flipping that equation and thinking about wellbeing as your enabler of performance, as opposed to your reward for results. And if we do that, then we're going to be sort of like layering in, even just instinctively, some of those psychosocial and psychological like safety skills that we need in our everyday conversations. And that's as simple as, how are you, before how are you going?
Love that. Fleur, it's been absolutely amazing having you in today. What a pleasure to hold space and pick your brain on this very important topic area. It is here, and every business needs to face it, no matter if you're big, small, or ma and pa businesses or big end of town. You need to really consider this for your own individual employees. So, Fleur, thank you so much for being a part of Cuppa today.
And thank you for creating those conversation opportunities that count.
They definitely do. Thank you so much, Fleur. And thank you, everyone, for being a part of Cuppa. This is our show, Pick My Brain, where every week, 1 or 2 shows we do around it. So please make sure that you stay tuned. If you didn't see the chat room today, make sure you join our free membership. That opens up all our replays and allows you to be able to engage in our chat rooms wherever you are. And please make sure that you check out all the upcoming shows on Pick My Brain also. We've got some fantastic shows coming up from our incredible community. Tap into their knowledge set, pick their own brain via our new platform that you can engage with them directly as well. That is it, everyone. Thank you so much for your Wednesday lunchtime, for taking the time today. If you did love this show, please share it with others. The replay link will be made available very, very soon. We'll make sure we send you an email if you have registered for this show today as well, so you can share this far and wide with your leaders. That is it, everyone. Talk to you soon. Bye.